I was a late adopter of the PC as a platform for playing video games on. I was always using consoles, usually a Nintendo console, because there was no other platform that could house their games legally. I only started considering the PC as an option in 2013 when I bought a PS3, and I had a lot of the multi-plat games with PS Plus, and a lot of those games kinda ran like ass on the PS3, by which I mean Borderlands 2. Then shortly afterwards, my brother gets the PS4 and I get the Borderlands Handsome Collection. This looked and ran a lot better than the PS3 version, but there were still many moments when the frame rate was all over the place, and as I grew older and more cynical, I started to notice it much more than I did when I was little. At this time, the family PC we had was a medium-high range PC from 2007, but it wasn't long until that was left in the dust. Around this time, consumer-grade graphics technology for PCs was starting to get better at a faster rate, and there was no way I could run Borderlands well on that PC. I was always wary of PC gaming because I thought it was going to be very expensive, very involved, and very tricky to get working and hard to manage even after you build it. And after building a custom PC and using it for 4 years to play games and edit videos like the one you're watching right now, I discovered that that was kinda true. And I'm gonna talk about that. It wasn't until 2016 that me and my brother built our family's first custom PC, the Big Bitch. We built this thing at the request of our parents, who set aside some money to build a PC that would last them for a good while. It was supposed to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, by teaching us how to build a PC for ourselves, but also to make sure that they would have a computer that could do whatever they needed it to do for a good few years. I called it the Big Bitch because it's fucking big. Really big. We didn't really know what we were doing, so we picked an astronomically huge case that we absolutely didn't need. The mentality was that it would give us enough space for hard drives, but we ended up only using 4 slots, which even a medium tower would usually have like 6, I think. Anyway, this thing weighs like 78 pounds. It's an absolute whale, just like me. On top of that, it's also loud as shit because we installed this water cooler. Now, the water cooler is really cool, pun intended, because it has a finite amount of water circulating through it, which sits in a reservoir where it gets cooled off by fans. Then it gets pumped back over top of the CPU, where the heat from the CPU diffuses into the water because physics. Then the now warmer water gets pumped back into the reservoir to get cooled down again, and the cycle repeats indefinitely. That's cool as shit, except that all the mechanisms involved make it a very loud and annoying machine whenever you're doing anything remotely strenuous, but I guess you gotta keep that CPU cool. The CPU was probably the most expensive part of this machine. It's an i7-6900K, which has 8 dual-threaded cores running at 3.2 GHz each, and it cost a stupid amount of money that we perhaps should have saved for the graphics card. The card we got by comparison was a little underwhelming. It was a 1070 FTW edition, which wasn't bad at all. But if we got a more price-effective CPU that could have honestly done what we needed it to do, we coulda and honestly maybe shoulda grabbed a 1080, but we were all young and stupid back then, so whatever. What is cool is the RAM. It's 32 gigabytes, 4 sticks of 8. We were trying to take advantage of something called quad channel. Now, quad channel is when a motherboard and 4 sticks of RAM love each other very much, and they access the shit out of each other with a much larger bandwidth than they would have had if it was just a single 32 gigabyte stick. It's technical and complicated, but I encourage you to read up on it because it's kinda neat. 1 year later, Phantom Bino builds a personal PC just for himself. This PC was not as crazy as the family one, but in some respects that was kind of fine by me. No stupidly huge computer case, so that's a big plus. Same graphics card, but the CPU was a Core i7-7700K processor. Half as many cores and threads, but at least they're individually faster, and at least for now, it has been largely sufficient, but quad core seems to be on its way out from what I gather, so who knows how long that'll last. This computer was definitely less expensive than the family one. Something I cheap out on all the time is mice and keyboards. Just give me a $12 Logitech 2-in-1 pack and I'm totally fine. Someone on Twitter once made fun of me a long time ago because I don't have a mechanical keyboard, but if there's one thing that I'm good at, it's buying cheap shit and praying that it works for 100 years, and this keyboard hasn't failed me yet, so rip. Building PCs is expensive, at least up front. If you want to build a PC powerful enough to outperform or at least coexist with the current generation of game consoles, it's probably going to be the price of the game console but multiplied by at least 4. From a quick Google search, the Xbox Series X GPU is roughly equivalent to a 2080 Ti card. The 2080 Ti variants cost anywhere over $1,000, so just the fucking graphics card alone is already more expensive than both the Series X and the PS5 combined at least. Not to mention you had to put up with the terrible pre-order system and getting beat by shitty scalpers and Bitcoin bitches, so yeah, it's bad. Then there's the CPU. According to Google, the Series X CPU is roughly equivalent to a Ryzen 7 3700X, which averages around $400, so that's $1,400 so far, and we haven't even talked RAM, motherboards, hard drives, cases, and cooling devices yet, and already this bitch is costing us more than both consoles combined. On top of that, there's also the matter of building the PC yourself with your bare hands, which might take a good while, and God knows with these expensive ass parts you're sure to have like 17 anxiety attacks while placing the graphics card, cause you know if you break it, that money's all gone. Or you could just pay another couple $100 for someone else to build it for you, but even after all that, once it's all set up, you have to put up with driver downloads and game configurations and Windows updates. Disgusting! Don't you dare complain about a PlayStation system update until you spent 2 months as a PC gamer. Windows updates, NVIDIA drivers, what the fuck? In case you missed my Cyberpunk video, I had to fully reinstall Windows in order to play it because some weird complications with the registry prevented me from updating to the latest version, and that was a goddamn travesty. So why? Why be a PC gamer? Well, a lot of reasons actually. Setting money aside for a second, a consumer-grade PC can always outperform the current generation of consoles. These machines are set in stone, and for the next 5-ish years, these are Sony and Microsoft's champions. But during that interval, PCs just keep getting more and more powerful by the year. We already had the 30 series, which far exceed both systems, especially the 3090, which you probably can't afford unless you break into fucking Fort Knox or whatever. And you got those crazy CPUs with 16 cores and 2 threads per core at a billion shits per second. Every game console, when it comes out, will probably be as powerful as a medium-high range PC, but for a quarter of the price, and in the short term, that's totally kick-ass. But it won't be long until the developers start reaching the limit of what they can do on that hardware. I remember being kinda underwhelmed by the power of the PS4. Going back to Borderlands again, that was already a last-gen game when the Handsome Collection was released, so it was kinda disappointing to see that these super powerful next-gen consoles couldn't even run it at full HD properly. And there were many other such examples. I mean, I'm sure part of it was poor optimization, but this generational transition was not at all what it was hyped up to be. In this day and age, consoles tend to hold PC games back somewhat in terms of technology because the devs are always thinking in terms of their ability to put games on every platform. Like Review Pickle America once said, making a powerful game console to compete with PCs is like chasing a ghost. You'll never catch up to PC gaming, it's just impossible. Spokespeople have caught on to the fact that some of us actually do have some understanding of how this technology works and that PCs are basically untouchable on a technical scale. So what do? Well, they do what they always do. They lie. I don't remember exactly where I heard this, but I could swear I saw some corporate dickface saying that the PS5 was more powerful than any PC on the market or something like that, and then they showed it off and I was like, oh, so it isn't. You lied. I remember Microsoft showing off the One X saying it was the most powerful game console ever made, which I knew was bullshit because the PC I built half a year before that was announced was largely just as powerful, and it was only like mid-range, so I wasn't even on the bleeding edge. But then again, PC isn't a console, so whatever, I guess. Every time some dickweed says something like that, I just put them on my list. What is the list? It's a fucking secret. Go away. The PC platform can always be the most powerful, so it stands to reason that they can always produce the best graphics. There are a lot of factors, but in general, game developers have to make compromises in order to get their games to run on consoles because the hardware is entirely static. But that also means that the fundamental scope of game visuals have to be built around console hardware as well. In the 90s, when they were making Half-Life and Quake 2, nobody gave a shit about whether or not they could run properly on an N64 because they were PC games. But now they have to build every game with other platforms in mind, which means that the disparity between PC and consoles is usually defined by just turning up shadow resolution or reflection resolution or whatever, but even those differences can go a long way after a while. Even games that look ridiculously good like Red Dead 2 and Ellie's Fists of Fury II could definitely have looked better on a PC. With PC, you often don't have to worry too much about graphical compromises and such because most people playing PC games are going to be using a decently powerful rig, but even if you don't have a super powerful rig, you're in luck because you can turn the graphics down. One thing I wish consoles would do is allow you to adjust graphical settings. It is becoming more common now for newer games to have a visuals mode versus a performance mode. Hell, I think some N64 games had that. But the PC allows for a much more in-depth look and input as to how to modify very specific settings all across the board in order to optimize the game in as specific of a way as you want to. And that's the cool thing about PC, it rewards you for knowing your shit and for fiddling around with it. I'm probably the only person in the world to say what I'm about to say, but I honestly have a lot of fun just messing with graphics settings and seeing how hard I can push my machine before it turns into a slideshow. When you're playing Uncharted on the PlayStation, the chances that you're thinking, yes, the ambient occlusion is looking marvelous today, or the anti-aliasing really has a way of tying the house together, or what the fuck is a ray tracing, are probably fairly low. The point of a console is that someone else already thought about all that shit for you, and they already figured out an optimal graphics preset, and they already built the PC for you, and by PC I mean PS4, and by they, I mean someone in a sweatshop who would probably beat the shit out of you if you saw your fat first world ass bitching about frame rates and shit. Since the PC is so customizable, there are a ton of variables that make it impossible to have an optimal preset worked out for every machine, so they kinda leave it in your hands. But the other thing is frame rate. A lot of people, myself included, tend to argue that frame rate is actually more important than graphics. With PC, depending on your specs, you might be able to have it all, or you can mess with the settings until you're running 60. I chose to play Cyberpunk on a PC because I knew that the PS4 version was virtually unplayable. Cyberpunk is a weirdo case where the game itself is kind of busted up on its own. It doesn't run great on any platform unless you have an absolute top-of-the-line PC, which I don't. Even as sporadic as the frame rate was on my rig, it was the best that I had. The settings are a double-edged sword, because if you know what all this stuff means, you can make a very informed decision about which settings are best, but if you don't know what it means, you could be in trouble. But even then, you can still learn, right? I didn't know what anti-aliasing was before Googling it, so yeah, you can figure it out if you got Google. In the case of game consoles, every single game is very specifically optimized and designed for the very specific hardware you're running on. If you're lucky, some consoles will have some form of backwards compatibility directly built in, but it can also be somewhat limited, like how the PS5 can't play anything before the PS4, or the Series X can only play some games from the previous consoles, but not all of them, or how the Switch is a fucking Switch so it can't do any of that shit. With PCs, it's a lot more open, and this allows you to run older games on a newer PC with very little trouble. There are some occasional bumps in the road. I don't know why the speed for driving cars in reverse in Vice City is inversely tied to the frame rate, but usually if the devs knew what they were doing, you can run older PC games on your newer PC no problem. Literally, the first thing that I did with my own PC was run Half-Life 1 at 4K, which was hilarious because all the menus were microscopic because the game was made in the 800 by 600 days. And that's a place where consoles fall short because there are a finite number of older PlayStations, right? And the PS5 can't play games before the PS4, which means that one day when all those legacy consoles break down, you'll no longer be able to play those older games. With the PC, you don't really have that concern. I can still play Quake 2 from '97 on this contemporary rig, no problem. And most games that were ever on a PC can still run on a PC today, somehow. Which isn't really true of game consoles. I can't play N64 on a Switch, and I can't play PS1 on a PS5, right? They don't let you do that. The PC still doesn't have a port of Red Dead 1, so it's exclusively not on PC, which is a goddamn tragedy, but whatever. PC has a ton of exclusives of its own, if you like to play shitty League of Legends. The exclusives you get on PC are either MMOs or nerd shit like Age of Empire or Total War or whatever the fuck. I don't really care. I play real games like Mario and shit. I'm just fucking with you. Mario's not a real game. There are no real games. Games aren't real. In the case of a dev like Nintendo, they never put their games on any other platform. They're a very proud, old-fashioned company that only allows their own games to run on their own shitty hardware. As nice as it would be to see Breath of the Wild with ray tracing at 4K and 60 FPS, that'll never happen. At least not officially. You see, the PC is also the platform of rebels because it's a far more open source and more customizable machine than a console is, and for that reason, it has become the place to be a bad boy. That's right, I'm talking emulators and mods and shit. Through emulation, the PC platform can play really any video game you want it to, granted with a lot of technical issues on the way and an understanding that what you're doing is kind of a legal gray area. Technically, you can install emulators on most home video game consoles, but that requires homebrew software and jailbreaking, at which point you run the risk of bricking your console. With PC, again, you don't really have that concern, at least as long as you have a decent antivirus software and you're not running T2ID download.exe, which is actually a Trojan botnet virus that uploads snuff videos from your grandma's laptop that your grandma may or may not have made herself. When it comes to games that are extremely hard to come by, whether that be because they're out of print or because no official localization exists, emulation has always had our backs by allowing us to enjoy those experiences, and the PC platform can sometimes enable some quality of life improvements, like higher resolutions, consistent frame rates, and save states, which can be used as a more reliable save system than the shitty battery save on cartridges which breaks after you use it too much. I would have been totally fine with giving Nintendo money for Mother 3, but they chose not to localize it, so fucking rip, right? And I love how people can play Thousand Year Door without giving $1,500 to some rando on eBay. That makes me very happy. Some games are just not practical to find anymore, like older gems from the N64 and GameCube days. I mean, right now, if you got the cash for it, you could probably hunt down a GameCube and the games you want to play for it, but how long is that gonna last? The systems and games have been out of circulation for over a decade now. They're absolutely finite, and one day they may all be gone, but emulation will still be here to preserve those gems for all time. In the case of Sony, some of their exclusives have been showing up on PC, like Death Stranding, Horizon Zero Dawn, and I think Days Gone, and as of very recently, some reports are suggesting that even Uncharted 4 could come to PC. Now that would be crazy. Maybe it's just a coincidence, but I like to think Sony is getting wise to the fact that people are adopting the PC platform more and more, and it'd be smarter to provide a legal and convenient way to play games on PC so they don't have to go to the trouble of building a barely functional PS4 emulator and hunting down a billion DLL files, which are also cleverly disguised viruses. Microsoft has also been putting a ton of their own games on PC as well, so perhaps there's something to be said about putting games on PC instead of just using band-aid solutions to prevent emulation. It would be nice if Breath of the Wild got an official PC port so that I could run it at 60 FPS, but I'm not gonna hold my breath for Nintendo budging on their ways. All online storefronts have sales, but there seems to be this idea that Steam has more sales more frequently and that there are tons of chances to get games cheap. I don't have the stats on that, so I can't say whether or not that's true, but I do remember Witcher 3 Game of the Year edition was always on sale for like $32. I mean, it's still a boring ass game in my opinion, but at least that's a decent price for it. I also got some of the Saints Row games for like $3, so that was pretty neat. Steam sales have sometimes been used as a counter-argument to the point that PC gaming is very expensive. Again, I haven't done the math, so I don't know if Steam sales are sufficient to offset the price of a gaming rig, but they are pretty great. And it's just about summertime, so there's sure to be a bunch more coming. When you're on PC, you can use whatever controller can connect through a USB port or Bluetooth, which is amazing because that covers a wide range of controllers. Or in the case of shooting games, you'll probably just use a mouse and keyboard because that offers a great degree of precision that you don't seem to get with controllers. Ever since I started PC gaming, playing any sort of FPS or third PS on a controller just feels wrong, and believe me, I tried. A lot of games feel great on a controller, but nothing can beat a mouse and keyboard if we're talking shooting games, especially considering a PS4 controller is still like 75 Canadinos, which is fucking unacceptable, especially when I could just buy a mouse and keyboard for 12 bucks. Imagine how much less expensive game consoles would be if they all just came with a fucking Logitech mouse and keyboard combo. But one of the coolest things about PC gaming is that you don't have to pay extra money to play games online. With PlayStation and Xbox and even fucking Nintendo now, you have to shell out extra cash to play games online on their platforms, which is asinine. But if you're playing a PC game on Steam, you don't need to pay for anything. I mean, you still gotta buy the game, but none of that extra nickel and dime bullshit for online multiplayer. Another great thing about PCs is that since they are a composite of several different smaller components, if your PC fucks up, it's entirely possible that it's just a very specific component that's malfunctioning, which can easily be replaced, unlike consoles where everything is super custom made and you have to buy an entirely new machine. So just to recap, very expensive upfront, that's bad. Windows updates, that sucks. Nvidia driver updates, those are terrible. No Red Dead 1, that's shitty. Exclusive games are made for nerds. Maybe you're a nerd, so that's fine. Good graphics, that's cool. Steam sales, those are neat. Free online, that's sick. More freedom in terms of controllers, more customizability in general, and backwards compatibility. That's all great. So, overall, go outside, dude. Mister, you have a kind face, and I would rightly appreciate it if you consider telling me what you thought about this video in the comments. Also, do feel free to drop a like or a dislike depending on how you feel, and considering hitting that there subscriber button thing. Also, I got a Twitch channel now, which I'll probably only ever use once every other week, but if you feel like it, consider following that, or don't. Look, I ain't no Pinkerton, I ain't gonna make you do nothing, but I would maybe appreciate it somewhat, so, anyway, that's all the time I got right now. I gotta get back to playing Animal Crossing New Leaf on the Nintendo 3DS. So stay safe, partner.